everybody. Good evening. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for another edition of our Operational Reality with Rocco Million Live. I'm Rocco Million, the host. This is my group, Nonpartisans for Progress. What I do, the reason I do what I do, and what I do is basically I'm a disabled veteran trying to participate in our democracy. It's that simple. There's no hidden agenda. We all have to participate in our democracy. We all have a civic and moral duty to participate in our democracy and help self-govern. That's the only way democracy even works. We have to stand united in solidarity against our bipartisan, right-wing, neoliberal status quo. It's everybody's duty to oppose systemic abuse and evil that's carried out in our name. All right. And the public right now, we don't want to deal with that. Every time you turn on the mainstream news, you see them talking about a great economy, maybe the best economy we've ever had. This is how the mainstream and the ruling class keep the public deluded, basically ignoring the brutality of our reality. They feed the public these neoliberal narratives that are based in fantasy. For instance, people will completely overlook the systemic abuse of involuntary unemployment. On the mainstream news right now, they tell us we have a great economy. Maybe the best ever, yet we have millions of people that want work and can't find work. And we have millions more that are working starvation wage jobs. How can you have a great economy when you have a majority of American workers working starvation wage jobs and can't make ends meet working starvation wage jobs? And this is not my opinion. This is actual data. This is actual facts. We have more household private debt right now than ever before in our history. All right. That means we don't make enough money to buy what we produce. All right. Our government has been suppressing our wages from the 70s with involuntary unemployment. All right, when our government targets 5% unemployment, that's forcing millions of people to be unemployed and poor, and so desperate that they're then willing to work for starvation wages under horrible conditions. All right, that's why involuntary unemployment creates starvation wage environments. All right, if our government's forcing millions of people to be poor and unemployed, that's going to put downward pressure on everybody's wages. And that's why our wages have been stagnant from the 70s, while our cost of living and our corporate profits, our cost of living and our productivity have been, at record highs. Our wages have been stagnant from the 70s. How can that be possible if it wasn't systemic abuse involved? Something decoupled our wages from our productivity. And that was when both parties in the 70s decided to kill the full employment policies of the New Deal. And the public needs to be forced to deal with this. All right. Ever since, both parties from the 70s have been targeting 5% unemployment, forcing millions of people to be unemployed and poor, while we have work all over America that needs done. Our communities are literally crumbling all over America. Schools are understaffed, bridges are collapsing, water's polluted, and we're forcing millions of people to be unemployed and poor. And again, this is class war. This fosters starvation wage environments. And over time, people can't buy what they produce. They don't have no money, no disposable income. So we're all forced into private credit cards for milk and eggs, private credit for healthcare, private credit for education, private credit for transportation, private credit for housing. This is how they force us to live a precarious existence. This is the neoliberal way to privatize our public space and deregulate everything. All right, they starve our economy of dollars. Our currency issuing federal government, Congress, it starves our economy of dollars by targeting unemployment. And, that again creates starvation wage jobs, forces us into tons of private credit, and that's unsustainable. Private credit always dries up. Unpaid bills won't get paid when you have no money. It's just a fact of life. So private credit's unsustainable, and we're only vulnerable to private credit when the currency issuing federal government fails to do its job, spending dollars up front. The solution is very simple. You target the federal budget deficit to true full employment with a federally guaranteed living wage job for everyone who wants one. True full employment. When our government stands at the ready to give people living wage jobs, now that forces business to up their game. Now business has to compete, and they have to offer labor a better wage than the federal living wage job and working conditions, or else or else capital wouldn't be able to attract the labor workforce away from the job guarantee program. So in other words, if government imposes a federally guaranteed living wage job for everyone who wants one, that makes the minimum wage the federal living wage without even a mandate to the private sector. Either the private sector beats the federal living wage, or they can't attract a labor workforce away from the federal job guarantee program. And then that automatically balances our economy up front with dollars instead of starving our economy and forcing us into unsustainable private credit. At the same time, we get to maximize our productive capacity with the federal job guarantee, rebuilding our crumbling communities in green, sustainable ways. This is win, win, win. This is how you make your community strong. You have to invest. The currency issuer has to invest in our productive capacity, mint and tax to provide for our general welfare and common defense to ensure domestic tranquility. This is not rocket science. When you look around and you see, millions of people dying for no other reason than a lack of cash, you're going to have a messed up society. Literally, every time you see homeless people and around the corner you see empty foreclosed houses, people are being taught to put profit over people in society. Every time we see loved ones dying of treatable, preventable illness, just because they don't have enough money, people are being taught to put profit over people in society. Again, we're forcing millions of people to be unemployed and poor, regardless of their job skills, regardless of personal responsibility. Again, because even if every job seeker had the best job skills and every job seeker had the most personal responsibility, because our government targets 5% unemployment, we would still be forcing millions of people to be poor and unemployed regardless. And that creates millions more working poor in the starvation wage environments created by involuntary unemployment. And also, if one person gets more job skills and they somehow beat somebody else out of their living wage job, well, then that person is then unemployed or working a starvation wage job. So, this involuntary unemployment is a systemic abuse that can't be fixed with personal responsibility. All right, guys, I just wanted to make sure that this thing was working. I keep jumping around here. It seems like my internet is working a lot better. So that's basically the deal. And when you think about things, think about it like this. What was feudalism? All right, we always hear about this stuff. When Rome would take over, when Rome was in charge of things, they would take over different parts of the world, and they wouldn't always raise the newly conquered areas. They wouldn't destroy the newly conquered areas. They would pretty much appropriate the cultures. And, they would put vassal kings in place, vassal feudal kings in place that would pay homage to Rome. All right. And so and then these vassal kings, their duty would be to, give Rome soldiers. And so the vassal kings would then appoint landlords, the lords. And these lords would have power over little sides of town, we'll say. And they could charge rent to all the commoners, and the king would give these lords that power so that these lords would be able to supply the manpower to the king when the king needed to provision an army. The same with Rome. So that was feudalism. And when capitalism come about, it was a reform of that feudal system where the landlords and the rentier class, with their unearned income, they were able to control everything. And they were able to be predators and leech off of the majority. So when capitalism come about, it was a reform of these feudal times. All right. As we expanded the vote, and gave everybody equal protections and equality under law, classical economists and, everybody during the Enlightenment foresaw a time where, no longer would the vested interests left over of feudalism be in control of the economic surplus. And when I say economic surplus, what I mean is no longer would the feudal interests be in charge of our economy, be the ruling class. All right, because they saw capitalism as a reform, and as you expand the vote to the commoners, well, then the commoners are going to occupy seats of power, and so they would have never been able to foresee the vested interest left over of feudalism, somehow still controlling our economic surplus and still, occupying the ruling class. They would have never been able to see that, but that's exactly what happened. And how has that happened? Gradually, and with propaganda. People in America today think up is down. They think left is right. We call it inverted totalitarianism, where we actually have the language of a democracy, but in reality, we have, a right-wing authoritarian status quo. A fascist neoliberal status quo. That's our reality. So we only have a democracy in name, and the fact of the matter is, people think that, socialism is fascism, even though socialism is a left-wing ideology, fascism is a right-wing ideology. But people get it completely mixed up. Backwards. People think that our government needs tax revenues to spend. Completely opposite. The government never needs revenue. It's us that need the government's currency. And so this inverted totalitarianism, that's why we got to discuss our actual reality, what's going on here. And what right now we see that, we're allowing neoliberalism to privatize our public space. We were supposed to have the democratically, socially owned government own everything instead of the feudal landlords and feudal monopolists and predators, instead of them and their unearned income controlling everybody and everything. We were supposed to have a democratically, socially owned government that owned all land, and it does by rights. That our government owns all land in America. Nobody can own land. We all rent. We all pay tax, and the government was supposed to tax all unearned income, the economic surplus, because that is what allows people to, amass wealth. And that money has nothing to do with the real economy of production and consumption. So the economic surplus, the unearned income of the rentiers, the landlords and monopolists and the predators, all that money was supposed to be taxed by our democratically, socially owned government, and thus rendered, thus keeping it from, corrupting our democracy and subverting our public purpose. Because that's what happens when these people, they get so much money through no hard work or through no, sweat equity of their own. They amass these great fortunes and all this wealth and power, and they turn around and they buy our public officials, and they subvert our democracy. They subvert our public purpose. And so that's why, classical economists, reformers of feudal Europe, they wanted to do away with the rentiers. They wanted to do away with the predators and the landlords and the unearned income. They saw unearned income as being bad, something that, needs to be dealt with. Somehow or another, people don't see this. They think that if you work for Goldman Sachs and you make $20 million, that every dollar is earned income. All right. Yet that person at Goldman Sachs doesn't produce a damn thing. Instead, Goldman Sachs takes existing assets and they strip them and they sell them in predatory fashion, so that the finance today doesn't help the working class. It doesn't add productive value to the real economy. Finance today instead extracts wealth and lowers everybody's standard of living. It's like, think of it like this. We allow like these corporate raiders, instead of corporate raiders, they're like regular Vikings, all right, going around, and they take over little town after little town that's sustainable, little fishing village maybe. They're a completely sustainable fishing village. They have everything they need. Everybody's happy. And then these Vikings come in and they take over, and they live in decadence on the people's hard work. And they do nothing. They don't add anything. That society would be just fine without them. And they come, and then once they use up everything, because they're living in decadence, they're living beyond their means in an unsustainable way, they just move on. All right. And it used to be that this sort of thing was frowned upon, and now people have forgotten the lessons of the past. Now we don't talk about unearned income. It's all earned income. Oh, well, someone had to, think about it. Someone had to put their money up. Someone had to use their land. It ain't their land. At some point in the past, at some point, somebody took that land from somebody else. All right. Nobody should own land. Nobody should own natural resources. And the needs of people should be met by your currency issuing government. But okay, guys, I just wanted to have a little conversation, see how this stream went. Let me see if we got any questions or anything to talk about before I go. How's everybody doing tonight? Anything you guys want to talk about or discuss before I go? I can't really see it. We are not going to vote our way out of oppression. We are not going to vote our way out of oppression. But you know what? That's perfect. I want to see that, because I do want to talk about this real quick. This is a big thing that drives me nuts. So many people believe that we're powerless and there's nothing you could do. The elections are rigged. The ruling class bribes our government. The Federal Reserve is private. It's a private banking cartel. There's nothing we could do, and that's self-defeating ideology. Don't be a defeatist. Don't be a nihilist. All right. We don't fight because we know we're going to win. We fight because we don't want to accept evil in our name. We don't want to leave our kids a future worse off without at least trying to fight back. So the thing is, we can make rigged elections irrelevant. We can literally make the bribes of the rich irrelevant. All right. In one day. All right. Look, the fact of the matter is, we can always collectively general strike and shut America down in one day without breaking one law or firing one shot. All right, you go right back to work the very next day, and then you leverage that capability to get your demands met. All right, and I'm not talking pie in the sky. This is how every labor protection and civil liberty has been got. The ruling class has never just given us justice out of the kindness of their heart. We have always had to collectively force the issue. All right, and historically, the ruling class will always capitulate to the public movement long before we ever reach a majority of support. Because once we reach a majority support, we depose the rulers either way. They know that. That's why if you look at historical accounts, say when we were in the Great Depression and labor rose up and, FDR told his, ruling class compatriots, his buddies, he said, look, either you give up a little bit of power and wealth now, or you're going to give it all up in the revolution that's sure to come tomorrow. Because during the Great Depression, you can work and do everything right, but there's simply, millions of people still couldn't make it through no fault of their own. And when wealth inequality and systemic hopelessness become the norm, revolution becomes very probable, and you end up with a very dysfunctional and violent society. And so the ruling class will always meet our demands long before we get a majority of support. And I just shared a good article about Mexico getting a really great president, a man of the people, and how this is going to be at odds and it's going to cause a lot of class conflict because he's not going to follow the neoliberal script like most of the world. But they talked about he won, in all likelihood, he had won the last 2 elections in Mexico. But because of wide voter fraud, they were able to cheat him. But this time, he was able to get 30 million votes, which was, double the last time he got. And because it was such an overwhelming amount of votes, the ruling class will not take a chance and rig that election. If we had 100 million, 200 million people turn out to vote in 2020 for Bernie Sanders, all right, I don't care. I know our elections are rigged, but if it's overwhelmingly and everybody everywhere wants Bernie, the ruling class would never be able to rig that election. They would never try to. So you have to understand, we the people have all the power collectively. Just like we don't collectively accept child labor anymore, we don't have to accept involuntary unemployment. We don't have to accept for-profit imperialism. We don't have to accept for-profit justice and the racist drug war or any of the other countless systemic abuses that are carried out daily in our name. Collectively, we can say no more at any time. If we collectively still allow child labor, kids would still be working 60-hour work weeks. This is not an opinion, it's a fact. Only when we collectively said, no, we don't accept that, did the ruling class give us child labor protections. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. If I don't see any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and sign off. Anybody want to talk about anything? Everything you're saying makes sense, but it won't happen by voting. Well, no, not by voting alone. I agree. Voting, there's no panacea. There's no one thing. But in totality, if you participate in our democracy, you vote and you also boycott, you also protest, you also demonstrate, you educate. We got to do all of the above, But I'll tell you one thing, no change has ever been got by not voting, by not participating. We guarantee that the voting won't work if you don't vote. All right, you think the ruling class wanted to give us a socialist, democratic socialist 4 times as the president of the United States and FDR, they didn't want him 4 times in a row. The people forced that. But yeah, I mean, the same thing, look at Nixon. You think he wanted the EPA? You think that the ruling class wanted civil rights? Do you think they wanted to end Jim Crow? All of this stuff was all every time, every civil liberty and every labor protection we have, we got by collectively forcing the issue, by collectively standing together and demanding that our public purpose be satisfied as it's mandated by our Constitution. Thanks, everybody, for joining me.